Testing. JB here. July 31st, 2019, last day of July. And then we head into the dreaded August, September, October. Really quick, just going to talk about a few things. And first is Apple after the close yesterday, beat on revenue and earnings, and some great guidance, considering they normally have conservative guidance, and you have the possible headwinds, competitive concerns, of course, and their Apple TV offering will be coming out, as well as their new product cycle comes September. So all bodes well. And then of course the tariff situation. You would think that would have weighed a little bit, but it didn't. So I would have thought with the earnings beat, if you had told me those numbers beforehand, I figured Apple would be over 220, and maybe it gets there today. But I think some of those concerns with the FTC, the tariffs, and competitive concerns probably is what's kind of capping this move. So we'll have to see how this plays out. Also the big part with Apple, and over the years, there's been so many companies, and I've said this a lot of times in my rants and week aheads for many years, but there's a lot of companies that have come and gone the way of the dinosaur because their inability to transfer from a hardware company to a services company, or at least have a mix that allows them to continue to grow. IBM has struggled with that. Although they seem to be doing a little better. Apple, it's taken a while for them to really get the services side because they have a huge base of loyal customers that they just need to figure a way to monetize outside of the phone side of it, right? So to think that they still, it's first time that Apple's revenue, well, at least the iPhone revenue has dropped under 50% of the quarter's revenue. That hasn't happened in, I don't know how many, maybe since the iPhone 3. I don't know the exact model that was out, but that's certainly a good sign. I know wearables have helped with that. You have the AirPods and Apple Watch. Then they shut down their Apple Music. So we'll have to see how this all plays out in the coming quarters, but certainly a strong quarter from Apple. If it was down, maybe it hit 215, showed some strength. I might look for some lotto calls. Otherwise, I'll probably just sit on my hands. Lots of earnings still coming. Teledoc reports after the close. I love the story just because it's disruptive. I mean, if you think about the healthcare space and what the future holds, that's certainly front and center. Teledoc is a name that can create efficiencies and disrupt the sector. I don't know where I was reading it. Uber, I think there's Uber Health, right? At some point, you're going to be able to get health professionals to come to your home. So I think they're already rolling some tests out there, but that's the future, right? I mean, instead of going to pick up your food, there's delivery, and then you have delivery with apps and all these, the bad buzzwords that Baidu used back in the day, but online to offline. All these things are transforming and disrupting. So Teledoc is certainly a name that I continue to look at as something in the coming months and years that I'll probably look for calls to play for movement to the hundreds. But it seems like their earnings haven't really met the expectations and heightened expectations, and then the stock sells off after earnings. So despite good results. So I'm a little concerned it might happen again. But I guess on the flip side, at one point it's going to have a huge squeeze from its earnings report. But I'll probably sit on the sidelines. Other names out there, so I'll probably wait on that. But just so you know my thoughts there on Teledoc. Impinji, strong report. It wasn't even like a monster earnings report. It was just a strong report, and the stock went over. It's painting $40 here in the pre-market. I was watching other stocks at the open yesterday, and by the time I looked for some calls on PI, the stock had already run off, and I'll probably pass it. Maybe it overshoots 41, 42 in the next couple days, but the risk reward there on the calls are tough. So as opposed to trying to chase this move, I'll probably wait for PI. But if another name, and again, I look for names that disrupt sectors when you're trying to find ways for shoppers and to be able to purchase goods. You're looking for logistics side, for transport, for shipping products, manufacturing side. All these fit in with Impinji. So it was formed, I think it was 87, $90 at some point. Then it came off those highs because of concerns over big orders from other big customers like Amazon. Didn't come to fruition. So maybe it starts to get towards that level in the coming months and years. So that's one of the reasons why PI is one of my favorite stocks here in the back half. Another name reporting earnings after the close today is Pluralsight. The stock has been trading in a tight range between 30 and 33. This is probably the catalyst that finally breaks out of that tight trading range. Huge short interest. My hope here is a solid earnings report, and then a nice raise on the guidance. The guidance is certainly more important than the actual numbers. So even if they miss a little bit, when you have these high growth names, I think it's more important that the guidance best expectations. If that happens, I think the stock could test 35. When I got the calls a couple weeks ago for the August strikes, I was hoping for a ramp up into the 34 range or so I could lock some in to cover costs. I think they got pretty close to being a double before the big pullback under 30 bucks. Maybe it gets a nice little ramp here today, and I can lock some of the calls in to cover costs. But if not, I'll probably just hold on for the binary event. Unfortunately, if there is a miss or guidance is weak, or even if it's in line, it's a possibility the bears might take hold because there's a huge short interest here. They'll smell blood, and they'll take it back under 30 bucks. So that's the risk of holding calls. So, yeah, less risk averse is probably, if you're risk averse, it's probably best to wait for another entry. There's always gonna be another entry. Stock's always gonna be there unless they go bankrupt, right? A Fed meeting after at 2 o'clock. So you got the Fed statement at 2 o'clock. You got the press conference with Powell at 2:30. The half cut rate, the quarter point rate cut, that's already baked into the market. So when that happens, if it's just a rate cut and they keep the status quo with the commentary, it's going to be a little tricky with the market. Maybe there's a little bit of weakness. I think you need Powell to come out. The statement's got to kind of hint at possible more rate cuts coming, and then Powell's got to kind of confirm that during the press conference and hint that there's going to be 2 more rate cuts at least into the end of the year. If he does that, I think the market will hold up and do pretty well. If not, scales back some of the conversation. Certainly an opportunity for weakness. And then the possibility, if there's a half-point rate cut, I think the market there'll be some big gyrations because it'll be a surprise. And then there might be some kind of squeeze. So I don't have time to talk about rate cuts and the market, and how it impacts the, I don't know if that's the question. But it's right now with what happened in the Eurozone. So this morning you had the EU's growth rate cut in half year over year. Then you have the China-U.S. trade talks ended, possibly coming back in September. So all this does is add more credibility to this global slowdown that's happening. So the Fed is doing its first rate cuts in 2008, and it's preemptive. It's not even like we have a slowdown in the U.S. economy. We're not in recession. There's not back-to-back negative GDP growth. So it's pretty amazing that we're going to do a rate cut to possibly halt a slowdown in the U.S. economy. So pretty interesting stuff. There's inflation. We don't have runaway inflation. Typically, in times of inflation, well, actually, inflation would be raising rates, but there's no concern. The concerns are kind of, they're out there, but they haven't really shown in the data. So it's kind of interesting. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. What else was that? Look to hold my August calls there, and I think that's about it, folks. We've got about 7 minutes, 50 seconds to the open. Let's have a great day. I'll be back. Rock and roll.